The wind cut like a blade through the cracked sidewalks of Bayview, stinging Malik's exposed skin as he pulled his thin hoodie tighter around his small frame. At just 11 years old, he already carried the weight of someone much older. His sneakers, worn down to their last threads, barely cushioned his steps against the rough pavement. Every step sent a dull ache up his legs, but he ignored it just like he ignored the gnawing hunger that had settled deep in his stomach. It had been a long time since Malik had thought of hunger as something temporary. It wasn't a feeling that came and went, it was always there, lingering like an old shadow. His mother did her best, working double shifts at the diner, coming home too tired to do anything but collapse onto their worn-out couch. And his little sister, Maya, still young enough to believe in magic, always asked questions Malik couldn't answer. "Will we have dinner tomorrow?" she had whispered the night before, her big brown eyes hopeful. He had lied, forcing a smile. Of course he had said, but he wasn't sure. Tonight, his burlap sack was nearly empty, just a few crumpled soda cans he had picked up from the sidewalk, barely worth a few cents at the recycling center. He had hoped for more, hoped to find enough to buy a loaf of bread or maybe a pack of crackers from the corner store. But hope, like everything else in his life, was in short supply. As he passed the bright windows of the coffee shop on 9th Street, laughter rang out, sharp and cruel. He didn't have to look up to know who it was. "Hey, look, it's the little trash collector." Malik pulled his hoodie up, trying to shield himself from the biting cold as he turned down a quieter street. The wind whistled through the barren trees, their branches stretching like bony fingers toward the night sky. Bayview never slept, but in this part of town, the world felt different. The sirens, the distant shouts, the muffled music from apartments with broken windows, it was all just background noise to him now. He had meant to head straight home. His mom would be back from the diner soon, and Maya would be curled up on the couch waiting for him. But as he neared the rusted gates of Holloway Park, something made him stop. A man sat alone on a wooden bench, hunched over, his thin jacket doing little to fight off the bitter cold. His white hair was wild, caught in the wind like brittle strands of cotton. His hands trembled as they lay limply in his lap, and his face lined with deep wrinkles was frozen in a distant, vacant stare. He wasn't just cold. He looked lost. Malik hesitated. He had enough problems of his own. He didn't have food to share. He didn't even have an extra blanket. He could keep walking, pretend he hadn't seen anything. But something about the way the man sat there so small against the vast emptiness of the park made it impossible to turn away. Clearing his throat, Malik stepped closer. "Sir?" His voice cracked slightly in the still air. No response. He tried again, softer this time. "Are you okay?" The man's pale blue eyes lifted to his, flickering with something between recognition and confusion. His lips parted, but when he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know." Malik glanced around the empty park, his breath visible in the freezing night air. The old man who still hadn't said his name shivered so violently that his whole body trembled, his fingers twitching like they were trying to hold on to something that wasn't there. Malik swallowed hard. This wasn't his problem. His stomach twisted, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. His mom and Maya were waiting for him at home, probably wondering if he had managed to scrounge up enough change for even a half loaf of bread. He barely had enough for himself. How was he supposed to take care of a full-grown man? But then the man's gaze lifted again, and for a second, just a second, Malik saw something in his eyes. Fear. Not just of the cold, not just of being lost, but something deeper, something Malik knew all too well. He sighed heavily and yanked his hoodie over his head. Terrible decision, stupid decision. He was going to regret this. "Here," he muttered, draping it over the old man's frail shoulders. "It's not much, but it's better than nothing." The man blinked, his expression shifting from confusion to something almost like gratitude. Malik ran a hand through his short, curly hair, exhaling sharply. "Look, I don't know what's going on with you, but you can't stay here. It's too cold. You can come with me for the night." The old man hesitated. "Home?" Malik nodded. Yeah, but just for tonight, he added quickly. My mom's already gonna kill me for this, so don't make me regret it, all right? For the first time, the man gave a small, fragile smile. Malik rolled his eyes, adjusting his empty bag over his shoulder. Great, now I'm running a charity. Then, grumbling under his breath, he grabbed the old man's arm and started walking. Malik knew this was a bad idea the moment he stepped onto the crumbling porch of their tiny apartment building. The hallway smelled like damp carpet and old cigarettes, and the flickering light above the stairs cast weird shadows that made everything feel even more sketchy. He tightened his grip on the old man's arm as they climbed the steps, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What if Mom freaked out? What if she called the cops? What if the guy suddenly remembered he was actually a millionaire and had just been playing along for fun? Okay, highly unlikely, but hey, a guy could dream. By the time they reached the apartment door, Malik's nerves were shot. He took a deep breath, braced himself, and pushed it open. His mom, Lena, was at the tiny kitchen table, surrounded by piles of bills, her dark curls messy from another long shift at the diner. Across the room, Maya, all of 7 years old and dressed in mismatched pajamas, was coloring on the floor. The second Lena looked up and saw a random old man standing in their doorway, her exhaustion evaporated. Her eyes narrowed. Malik, she said slowly, setting her pen down. Who is that? Malik cleared his throat. Funny story, Malik. He sighed. I found him at the park. He was freezing. He doesn't remember where he's supposed to be. Lena stared at him like he had just said he adopted a raccoon. The old man, who still hadn't said his name, by the way, shuffled awkwardly, looking at the floor like a kid caught stealing cookies. Maya, meanwhile, was absolutely fascinated. She gasped dramatically, "Did you find a grandpa?" Lena shot her a look. No, he did not. Then, back to Malik, we don't have the space. We don't have the food, and we definitely don't. But then she really looked at the man, saw the way his hands shook, the way his lips were almost blue. She sighed, the same way Malik had sighed earlier. Come in, she said finally. Warm yourself up, Malik exhaled, relieved. Maya, now bouncing with excitement, ran off to grab a blanket. Malik turned to the old man, raising an eyebrow. Guess that makes it official. Welcome to the chaos. The apartment was small, okay, tiny, but it was warm, and for the first time all night, the old man stopped shivering. Malik watched as Maya, practically vibrating with excitement, rushed back with one of their blankets. Well, technically, it was Malik's blanket, but there was no point in arguing. She dramatically flung it over their guest's lap like she was tucking in a royal prince. There, she declared, now you're cozy. The old man blinked at her, eyes wide, before giving her a small, almost shy smile. Malik had seen that look before, the kind people had when they weren't used to being treated with kindness. Meanwhile, his mom had already moved into full mom mode. She grabbed a pot from the stove, poured the last of their very, very watered-down broth into a bowl, and slid it across the table. It's not much, she muttered, crossing her arms, but it's warm. The man hesitated for a second before picking up the spoon. He took a slow sip, then another. And then, just for a moment, he closed his eyes like it was the best thing he had tasted in years. Malik watched him carefully. Who was this guy? He clearly wasn't from around here. His clothes, though worn, had once been expensive. His shoes, scuffed but polished, weren't the kind you found in Bayview's second-hand stores. Malik glanced at his mom. She was watching the man, too, but her expression was unreadable. The man set the spoon down, his hand shaking slightly. Then, in a voice so quiet Malik almost missed it, he whispered, "Thank you." Lena exhaled slowly. Malik could tell she was still debating whether she was going to kill him for bringing home a total stranger. Maya, completely unfazed, plopped onto the couch beside their guest and grinned up at him. So, do you remember your name yet? The man hesitated, his brow furrowed. Then I think it's Henry. Malik arched an eyebrow. You think? Henry gave a sheepish shrug. It sounds right. Maya clapped her hands. Henry it is. Lena shot Malik a look that very clearly said, "This is your mess now." Malik sighed. "Great, now we have a Henry." Malik sat cross-legged on the floor, watching Henry from the corner of his eye. The old man had finished his soup and was now dozing off on their couch, Maya's tattered blanket pulled up to his chin. His breathing was steady, his body finally still after all that shivering. Malik's mom was still at the kitchen table, rubbing her temples. She hadn't said much after letting Henry in but the silence, loud. Maya, however, had no such hesitation. She sat crisscross on the floor, coloring away like she hadn't just witnessed her brother bring a complete stranger into their home. "I think he's like a lost puppy," she whispered, leaning closer to Malik. "Maybe we should put up found posters." Malik snorted. "Yeah, I'm sure that'll work." But she had a point. Who was Henry? Someone had to be looking for him, right? People didn't just go missing without someone noticing. That's when Malik noticed something, a glint of silver on Henry's wrist. He scooted closer and carefully lifted the old man's frail wrist. It was a bracelet, thin, a little scratched, but clearly expensive. This wasn't just some random piece of jewelry. It meant something. Maya peered over, eyes wide. Woo. Maybe he's a secret spy. Malik ignored her and flipped the bracelet over. His breath caught. Numbers. A phone number. His mind whirled. This could be it. This could be the way to figure out who Henry really was. But then doubt crept in. What if whoever answered didn't care? What if Henry had no one, only one way to find out? Malik took a deep breath, reached for the old landline, and started dialing. 1 ring, 2, 3. Then, a voice, sharp, urgent. "Hello." Malik swallowed. Hi. "I think I found someone who belongs to you." Malik clutched the phone, suddenly aware of how fast his heart was beating. This could go really well, or really, really badly. The voice on the other end came again, sharper now. "Who is this?" Malik cleared his throat. My name's Malik. I found this old guy at the park. He was freezing, looked kinda lost, and he had this bracelet with your number on it." Silence. For a second, Malik thought the call had dropped. Then, a sharp inhale. "Oh my God!" Malik flinched at the sheer emotion packed into those 3 words. Whoever this guy was, he cared. A lot. "Where is he?" The man demanded, his voice laced with urgency. "Is he okay? Is he hurt?" Malik glanced over at Henry, who was still curled up on the couch, mouth slightly open, snoring lightly. "So, no, not exactly in critical condition." "He's fine," Malik reassured the caller. "He was freezing when I found him, but we got him warmed up. He's asleep now." Another deep, shaky breath, then the voice softened. "His name is Henry Whitman. He's my father. He has early-stage dementia. He gets confused sometimes. I took him to the park today for some fresh air, and I turned around for 1 second. When I looked back, he was gone." Malik frowned, gripping the phone tighter. So Henry wasn't just lost, he had been missing. "I've been looking for him for hours," the man continued. "I thought..." He cut himself off, like he didn't want to finish that sentence. Then, steadier. "Where are you?" "I'm coming to get him." Malik hesitated. Trusting strangers wasn't exactly a habit he liked to keep, but this guy... He sounded real. Desperate, like someone who had just been given back something he thought was gone forever. He took a deep breath and gave him the address. "Thank you," the man whispered before hanging up. Malik set the phone down, exhaling. Maya, who had been listening the entire time, leaned in and whispered dramatically, "Do you think he's going to be rich?" Malik groaned. "Maya, go to bed." Malik stood by the window, arms crossed, staring out at the empty street. Any minute now. The apartment was silent except for the soft sound of Henry's breathing from the couch. His mom sat at the kitchen table, drumming her fingers against the wood, her face unreadable. Maya had refused to go to bed, insisting she had to see how this movie ends. Then headlights. A sleek black sedan rolled up in front of their building, its polished exterior looking wildly out of place on their street. That was not a Bayview car. That was a belongs dash and dash a dash rich dash neighborhood dash with dash gated driveways kind of car. The engine cut off, and for a second, nothing happened. Then the driver's door swung open, and a man stepped out, tall, sharp suit, expensive coat. He moved with purpose, scanning the building like he was bracing for something terrible. His face was controlled, but his eyes looked desperate. Malik exhaled. Showtime. Before the man could knock, Malik pulled the door open. The guy Carter Whitman, if Malik remembered right, barely glanced at him before stepping inside, eyes already searching. The moment they landed on Henry, his whole body seemed to deflate. "Dad," Carter breathed, striding toward the couch. Malik watched as he knelt beside Henry, his polished shoes sinking into their ragged carpet. He hesitated, like he was afraid to touch him, before gently shaking his shoulder. Henry's eyes fluttered open. He blinked, disoriented, before focusing on the man in front of him. For a second, there was nothing. Then, recognition. Carter. Carter let out a choked laugh. "Yeah, Dad, it's me." Malik glanced at his mom, expecting her usual guarded expression, but for once, she just looked tired, like she understood something about Carter that Malik didn't. Maya, of course, had zero filter. She whispered not very quietly, "Dang, he is rich." Carter looked up then, finally really seeing them. His eyes landed on Malik, scanning his too thin hoodie, his taped-up sneakers, the apartment that, despite its warmth, was undeniably small. Then without hesitation he stood, stepped toward Malik, and stuck out his hand. "Thank you," he said, voice thick with something real. "For taking care of my father." Malik hesitated. Rich guys didn't usually thank kids like him. But after a beat, he reached out and shook Carter Whitman's hand. Malik had never shaken hands with someone like Carter Whitman before. Rich guys didn't usually acknowledge kids from Bayview, let alone thank them. But as Carter gripped his hand firmly, there was something in his eyes, something Malik couldn't quite place. Gratitude, respect, maybe even understanding. Lena cleared her throat, breaking the silence. "Look, I'm glad he's safe," she said, arms crossed. "But we're not looking for a reward, if that's where this is going." Carter's lips twitched like he was amused. "It's not a reward," he said simply. "It's an opportunity." Malik frowned. "Opportunity for what?" Carter glanced at Henry, still wrapped in Maya's too small blanket, then back at Malik. And for the first time, Malik realized Carter wasn't just looking at him, he was really seeing him. "You're a smart kid," Carter said, "a good kid. You saw someone in need and didn't hesitate to help. That says a lot about you." He paused. "How's school?" Malik shifted uncomfortably. "It's fine," which was a lie. Carter's expression didn't change. "You like learning?" Malik hesitated, then shrugged. "Yeah, I guess." Another lie. He didn't just like learning, he loved it. But in Bayview, being smart didn't mean much when you were too busy surviving. Carter nodded, like he understood. "I want to help," he said. "Not with money, not with charity, but with a future." Malik blinked. "What?" "I'll cover tuition," Carter continued. "Supplies, tutors if you need them. No strings attached. The only thing I ask, that you keep working hard, that you don't let this place," he gestured around the apartment, "not unkindly, hold you back." Lena inhaled sharply. It's not a handout," Carter interrupted. "It's a thank you, a real one." Malik felt something tighten in his chest. This wasn't just about money, it was about belief. About someone who barely knew him seeing more in him than just a kid from a rundown neighborhood. Lena looked at Malik. It was his choice. Malik swallowed hard, then nodded. "All right," he said, "let's do this." The next morning, Malik stood outside the school gates, his breath curling in the crisp morning air. Everything felt different. The backpack slung over his shoulders was heavier than he was used to, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. A chance, a real chance. The night before, after Carter left, Malik had expected his mom to shut it all down. To tell him they didn't take help from strangers, that nothing in life came for free. And she almost had, but then she looked at him. Really looked at him. "You want this?" she had asked, her voice softer than he expected. Malik didn't even have to think about it. "Yeah," he had said, "I do." And for the first time in a long time, his mom hadn't argued. She had just sighed, ruffled his hair, and muttered, "Then don't waste it." Now, standing in front of the school, Malik felt the weight of those words, "Don't waste it." He glanced toward the street, where the sleek black sedan was parked at the curb. Carter sat behind the wheel, not saying anything, just watching. No pressure, no expectations, just a quiet nod like he was saying, "You got this." And for the first time in his life, Malik believed it. Taking a deep breath, he squared his shoulders and stepped forward. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but for once, he knew it was his to shape,